Hello, everyone, and welcome to Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Carol Nuka-Maluto, Chair of CMC's Board of Trustees. We're very happy to see all of you here today. Today's forum, Criminal Sentence Reform, is presented in partnership with Impact Community Action and SCORE Ohio, each of who have many friends and associates in the audience. Won't you please help me thank them? Today, we explore the ongoing effort to address what has been an unequitable and expensive history of incarceration. Did I just say incarnation? Well, maybe that's the new step. I don't know. 2 weeks ago, we heard the perspective of lawmakers on this topic as they work to pass reform measures. In today's forum, we are pleased to hear from several community leaders with specific expertise on criminal sentence reform and the possibilities and opportunities it might bring. So let's hear from our panel. Please welcome President and CEO of Alvis Incorporated, Denise Robinson. Denise. Managing Director of the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation and former presidentially appointed United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio, Carter Stewart. Franklin County Municipal Court Judge Jodi Thomas. And our host, State House News Bureau Chief for Ohio Public Radio and Television, Karen Kasler. Karen.
I was very glad to moderate the forum that we had 2 weeks ago talking about the legal implications of this. So it's really going to be interesting to hear from people who live on the other side of criminal sentencing, who are dealing directly with the laws that you might have been here and heard the changes being talked about then. There are 49,147 people in Ohio's 28 prisons as of last month. Most of them are not there for drug crimes, though. There's about 14% that are. But that percentage, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, spends about an average less than 2 years in prison. And so they come back into their communities. They come back and they find obstacles in housing and employment. They find obstacles in reintegrating into the communities, reconnecting with their families, and trying to rebuild their lives. And so that's why we're talking about this. And of course, there's also the background of the opioid crisis in Ohio. Ohio's opioid crisis in 2017 was the second highest in the nation in terms of the deaths of overdose deaths related to opioids. 4,854 people reported by the state died of deadly drug overdoses in 2017. That's more than 13 people a day. And many of the people who end up in prison with drug-related crimes do have that danger that's there. And so that's one reason why we're talking about all this. So I want to turn it over to our experts here, and I want to start with Denise. I mean, your organization has been doing this work for more than a half a century, 52 years, I think, now, since you celebrated your 50th 2 years ago. In that time frame, do you think that people's attitudes have changed, especially with people who you're serving, the folks that are coming out of prison after, 2 years, a year in prison, trying to reintegrate, trying to reconnect? What are the attitudes that they're facing and the obstacles that they're dealing with?
I think that those attitudes have not changed as much as we think they have. I think that it's not very public anymore. I think there's still a lot of fears and misconceptions when you look at the population that they don't deserve a second chance in some ways. However, there's a flip side of that too, where people are really engaging and helpful. But one of the things that we have to understand too is that when our folks are released from prison, they're really hungry and they're really ready to make a change. They're, especially those 1 to 2 year stints that they're doing in prison, they're ready to make changes. And I'm happy that we're able to be there to help them make those changes. You will see more community members and more faith-based organizations involved in the work now, where before you didn't see that many folks that were really interested in the work. But I think that it's kind of hidden, because we'll see it sometimes, especially when it gets to the employment piece of getting our folks employed. You will see employers that still have a prejudice against the population, and that they are not giving them the chances that they need. Maybe they're qualified to do the work, but not being given that chance.
I want to bring Carter Stewart into this. You've seen both sides of this now. You were the U.S. attorney. You were prosecuting people for drug crimes. Now you're on the other side of this. Talk to me a little bit about what your experience is here.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Columbus Metropolitan Club for hosting this event and having not just one, but two sessions on this important topic. That by itself is significant, and I'm very glad to see that. One of the key questions is, why is there all of this attention now? There's the First Step Act that was passed on the federal level. There's Senate Bill 3 that's being discussed now in Ohio. You know something significant is going on in today's world when Republicans and Democrats actually agree on something. And the reason they agree is because of what I've seen, both as a prosecutor and what I see now. The United States has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. On a per capita basis, we are the most incarcerated country on the planet. We are more incarcerated per capita than Iran, more than North Korea. There is a recognition of the economic cost of that, particularly in today's world when the unemployment rate is so low. There is an economic cost to basically discarding a significant portion of the population. Today we have 2 million people in jails and prisons across the country, another 7 or 8 million under court control, either through probation or parole, and then you have another 20 to 30 million who have criminal records who are, for the most part, excluded from the economy. So there's the economic toll of not including them, and then there's the human toll, the toll of people who are pulled from their families, pulled from their communities, the collateral consequences of kids growing up without parents. The human toll is incredible, and that there is a recognition of both sets of issues, both sets of problems, and I think that's why today we're seeing momentum building behind changing the situation.
But it has been a long time coming. I mean, the discussions about criminal sentencing reform go back, what, a decade at least?
Actually, longer than that.
At least.
The incarceration rate started taking off about 30 years ago, and even back then there was a lot of talk about it. But in terms of the conversations that we're having today, yes, they've been happening for 5 or 10 years, but change is slow, and as you can imagine, there's been opposition to actually changing the system as it now stands.
Judge Thomas, I want to bring you in now that you were a public defender, so you also have seen both sides of this.
Yes, and I'd like to say that, you know, I started as a public defender over 17 years ago, and the court system looked very different than it does now. And so I've been able to kind of see the gradual shift. You know, back when I started, it was your client had this charge and this is their prior, so this is how many days in jail they're going to do. It's a very different conversation we're having now. It's not, you know, now we ask not what did you do, it's what happened to you. So we are trying to figure out and change that stigma in the court system to be able to see what's going on with these individuals so that we can better provide resources and help them so that when they get out into the community, they're productive. I know that I worked for the last 5 years as a public defender in our specialized dockets, so our 2 drug courts, our human trafficking program, our military and veterans program, and our mental health court. And I have seen how these restorative therapeutic programs in the court system can help these individuals come out of being justice involved and be able to be productive in the community. You know, one of the things when I took over the drug court last year, it was called the Opiate Extension Program. This is when we were seeing, you know, the rise in the opiates. But what I found was that was a stigma in and of itself for these individuals, you know, to say that they were in a drug court or that they are on opiates. And so we see, you know, the stigmas that are involved. So we changed the name to HEART, Helping Achieve Recovery Together. We have to change that focus. It's not just about getting them clean and off these dangerous drugs. It's about addressing the barriers. And this is everything that we were talking about, the employment, the housing, you know, family reunification. So we now are focusing on how to get people in recovery and how to keep them in recovery. So our drug courts, our programs in the court systems are addressing workforce development. We're addressing housing and how to help them, get approved for housing and getting their children back. So I think we're changing the focus so that we can try to get more of that community involvement in, not just the courts, but the churches and the synagogues and the employers and all of these other resources, because this is how we can change their lives, people, places, and things. That's what we focus on.
Are the drug courts enough of an incentive to help people who might not be wanting treatment? They don't want to go into that. Is there enough of an incentive there to put them in that direction rather than sending them to prison? I
think right now the way it's set up, at least in Franklin County, is we have, I see when people are charged with felony F5 or F4 possession, they're screened and they're offered an opportunity to get a misdemeanor for them to be a part of the HART program. And then at the end of that 2-year program, that charge, that guilty plea that they entered will be vacated and dismissed. Then they can apply for that to be sealed, versus if they're convicted and they go through regular probation, there's that waiting time that they have to go through to get that conviction sealed. So there is incentive. I will say not everybody is ready for change when they're offered these programs. However, we are seeing that if we can engage them, quick, we're getting peers involved that are helping them. Peers are individuals that are in recovery, that have lived experience, that have been trained. If we can get them involved with these individuals the minute they get out of jail, help them, take them to their first support meeting, help them come to see the judge for the first time. If we can engage them quicker, we can help that motivation change. And we have definitely seen that after a time that motivation changes. So.
And if I could add to that, I think it's critical that we not just rely on the courts for drug addiction treatment. It can't just be that you're threatened with a felony count if you don't go. In addition to holding people accountable that way, it's critical that we have centers, community centers, and addiction centers that people can go to on their own free will, that offer the same types of services, that offer quality services. When I was U.S. Attorney, I was so disheartened when I'd go to a small town in Ohio that was getting a whole lot of federal resources. They were getting money for police officers, money for technical equipment to fight against the opioid crisis. And then I'd turn around and say, well, how many treatment centers do you have in this town? And the answer would always be 0. So there has to be a way outside of the criminal justice system to reach that same population for folks to approach that want to do so on their own and can afford it.
I just this morning talked to the director of the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, Annette Chambers-Smith, about that, and she specifically talks about treatment deserts that exist in Ohio. And Denise, you now in Alvis, you've expanded a lot. You're not just in Franklin County, you're in other areas. Is that helping to try to water those treatment deserts so that there are opportunities and to try to reach the rural population that is not getting covered?
Yes. One of the things that I always say is we have to stop criminalizing addiction. We don't punish people with a heart disease or with a diabetes. We don't punish those folks, but we punish people with addictions. And so that's number one, is we have to stop doing that. But yes, it is getting better in communities, and because we are spread out, Alvis is in Columbus, Dayton, Chillicothe, Lima, and Toledo, but we also are a participant in the Ohio Community Corrections Association that represents providers all over the state. And so we're still seeing low resources in the urban areas. I mean, not in the urban areas, but the rural areas. Thank you. But we're seeing an increase in the urban areas. So we actually have a program, Alvis has a program in Chillicothe, and so it has been trials and tribulations really trying to get services for our client population in those rural areas. And so, but I think there's a lot of providers like Alvis that are around the state that are now trying to put a lot of resources. Also, we're doing a lot of telemedicine, where we're able to do the treatment over the internet and through your computer, as long as you have a proctor in the room. So we're able to have the counselors here in Columbus, and they can, broadcast that throughout the state. So I do see that things are really changing, because again, people should not go to prison because they have an addiction. People should be in our community programs with available resources, but there still needs to be work to be done in the rural areas.
I want to talk about what is only 8% of the population, but a growing part of the population in terms of prison, and that's the women who are in prison. And there are unique needs for women in prison. Many of them are mothers. Marysville, its prison has a nursery in it, which is an interesting, it's gotten some coverage. I want to ask you specifically about programs that try to reach women and work with their individual needs and also the needs of the family, because if mom's in prison, it really does affect the whole family.
Okay, so now you just hit my soft spot. Because this is something that is near and dear to me, and we've done a lot of different programs at Alvis in particular, because we have to stop thinking and ignoring our children, our families, and our communities just because someone goes to prison. Females are the fastest growing population in prison, and it is growing at leaps and bounds, but in a lot of cases, they can be treated in their communities. But what you see, though, is that there's the kids that are left behind. And what some folks are doing when women come back to communities, we have got to use gender-specific programming. We cannot program someone a female the same way that we program a male. And so those specific programs, working with the women that come out of the catch court with women in human trafficking, it's very different. You have to use research-based and evidence-based approaches when you're working with any population, but in particular with women. We have to address the trauma. So we have to provide the trauma-informed care for our women. And then we have to work with women. When they go to prison, their kids are left behind. So their kids are left with mom or grandma or whoever to take care of the kids. It's a little bit different when men go away. Their kids are usually taken care of by their significant other. And so we really have to address all of those kinds of emotions with our women, getting their kids back, being able to reintegrate them with their kids. It's families, it's kids, it's the women, and it's also our communities. Our communities are in disrepair because of it, and we have to bring that all back together.
I just want to highlight something. You said something critical, which I agree with, which is when mom goes to prison, the whole family is affected. I just want to emphasize when dad goes to prison, the whole family is affected as well. The impact of kids growing up without fathers is incredibly huge, and it's something that my foundation cares about, in the sense we focus on an organization called Fathers Uplift in Boston, which is specifically targeted to help men coming out of prison, coming out of homelessness, reconnect with their kids, and they've shown the research and the data of the damage done when kids don't have their fathers. So when anybody goes in prison, it affects the whole family.
Well, I just last Friday, I spent the afternoon at the jail at a program where it was women that have been charged and they were sentenced on their felony, and they're using their time in there to get some resources, and it was called the Pathways Program, and it's a several-week program where they are learning all of these tools that we're talking about to help them when they do get released, to get linked in the community. And one of the programs that they offer within Pathways is this program called Peace Love. It is an art therapeutic program where we are seeing the women use that voice in a different way. And I also learned that they're doing this Peace Love art therapy program with the maximum security prison, with the LGBTQI programs, or people in the jail. And it's just wonderful to see that. We have to remember that there is not one recipe that there is that if everybody follows this one recipe, then they are guaranteed to be successful, and that's it. We've now learned that you can't just go to IOP treatment, you can't just do 12-step programming. There is so many different things, and we have to learn about each person individually to see what's going to help them. One of the things we do in the HEART program is we did bring Peace Love into the courtroom where they were doing this art therapy, meditation, and yoga. Self-care is one of the most important things that we forget about. But a lot of the individuals that are suffering from mental health and addiction issues, they've been using for so long, their bodies aren't healthy. We have to focus on that self-care. So we bring, Ohio Health, they have a mobile unit that comes to the courthouse to help, educate on medical needs. So we have to just start thinking outside the box when it comes to helping these individuals. Having the treatment there and the counselors is wonderful, but then also addressing some of those other things, especially with our women population. I worked very closely, not only as an attorney, but I help out in the CATCH program, our human trafficking court, and the trauma that these women have experienced in their life is beyond anybody's imagination of what they've experienced. And so it's hard to break down those walls for them to be open and talk about what's happened to them. So we have to provide, resources that give them that security so that they can learn, how to feel their self-worth and to feel, these women are so resilient, and we need to have, really good programs for them. And if they are incarcerated, to start working on that while they're in jail. That trauma-informed, evidence-based treatment. So,
when you talk about individualized treatment and treating people as individuals, does it make you nervous when people at the State House are starting to talk about making big changes to laws? I mean, certainly, Carter Stewart, you said that this is a moment where everybody's coming together and agreeing something needs to be done. Do some of the changes that you're looking at concern you at all as you think about how it's actually going to affect you in the courtroom?
Well, I mean, it is something, that, we are concerned about if they're reclassifying and they only get misdemeanors, is there going to be enough of a carrot to make them want to stay involved in these programs? I think there will be. I think that the courts are being educated, the judges are being more educated to change that conversation and start treating these individuals that are coming in front of them and asking that question, not what did you do, but what happened to you and how can we help you? And when you start to change that dynamic, then the individuals that are coming into the court system are going to feel like they matter, that they're not the lowest forms of our community. And so, if they're given these opportunities, so I'm excited that we're having this conversation, especially a bipartisan. And absolutely, we need to come together and figure out how we can help these individuals, because I know in the municipal court, 90% of the people that come in front of me, or the thousands of individuals I've represented over the years, are not bad people. They were truly struggling with mental health, homelessness, addiction, and that conversation needs to change, and we need to help them.
I want to bring up, your prosecutors have spoken out on some of the changes that are coming in Senate Bill 3, and they're not here to ask or to represent, so I'm going to be their voice for just a second here. One of the things they said is changing the classification of some of those drug crimes could give people an incentive to, where's the incentive to break their addiction? Because if they think they can get a slap on the wrist and go back to their lives where they are just in substance abuse and that sort of thing, that incentive needs to be there. So I want to ask you about that.
So I would say Senate Bill 3 reduces penalties for possession, but not for trafficking. So there still will be a stick over their heads, I would say, that would still hold them accountable. So that, as a former prosecutor, I'm not concerned that there's going to be less ability for the court to influence behavior. And I don't know if you feel...
And the other half of this, too, is that they said that changing these classifications, well, if people really want to go through the long journey that it takes to go through treatment, to be in recovery, well, then they can always have their records expunged. Is that something that you want to comment on?
We need all the tools. We need all the tools, I think, to give judges the tools to do the right thing and the ability, prosecutors as well. And to your question about are you excited or scared by government coming in and doing good things, I'm both. I think there's certain things that it will immediately make a difference, and this isn't Senate Bill 3, but the decision to no longer handcuff women who are giving birth, legislating that away, I think is an incredibly positive thing. The other legislative changes that government on the federal level and on the state level are making are the right step, the right intention. I've never thought that government will solve all of our problems. It has to be done in conjunction with the public, with folks, citizens raising their hands, with nonprofits working together. So we can nudge the government. I don't think the government is ever going to get it 100% right, but as long as we try to keep it moving in the right direction, I'll always have hope.
And this whole idea of the government doing something, of legislators making a difference here and making a change, for years we've heard them talk about wanting to lower the prison population, and they want to take down the barriers for those who are leaving prison, especially after short sentences. They want to give more flexibility to judges. But then there's the other side of the argument that we also hear, that they want to be tough on crime, and they want to protect vulnerable populations. They want to make sure that there's a carrot and stick approach to get people into treatment. And so, Denise, I want to ask you, how do you ride that line, and where do you think that the government is and lawmakers and the public has fallen now? Which side?
So I do think that there's a lot of momentum for both sides. I think people do want to see people not get a hand slap, but they do want to see people get treatment. And I think with some of the new bills that are out there right now, they're really interesting. But one of the things that and Judge Thomas and I talked about this a little bit earlier, is that we don't want to take the judge's discretion. That's number one. We don't want to take that away, because why would we need them? If they're not able to make decisions, they're the ones that can make the informed decision. But when you talk about some of the things where you can, in lieu of, I really like the bills that have in lieu of treatment, that if you go to treatment, then you can get the reduction of sentence. I think that really helps our population, especially if they're serious about their recovery. I think that's a really good thing to talk about and to do. There's some things in some of the legislation, we looked at a whole list of those in the last month or so, because we've been advocating for some parts and pieces. I think some of the new bills get things right, some things don't. Some things that have passed in the past, some of the bills that have passed in the past are like really, really good. But then you have the Supreme Court that will change the sentencing, and then it's like, oh gosh, now all of a sudden we added more people to it. So I don't know. I just have I know that we have to continue to fight when these bills are coming out, and to really get our pieces. And I talked about the Ohio Community Corrections Association earlier, but we really advocate and lobby a lot to make sure that people are being treated in the community.
I think, we'll ask the participants in the program, why are you here? And a lot of them will say, well, I don't want to go to jail. That's a huge motivation for some people. And if that's what it is to get them to be in treatment and then to get all these services, because we always see that once we can get them situated with all these resources and give them that support in the community, then that changes, and then it just becomes part of their life, and then they're ingrained in their recovery and everything that they're doing. But as Denise said, we do need that in our toolbox. If you take away that ability to hold them accountable, then it is going to be to them, well, I'll just plead guilty, nothing's going to happen to me, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. So we have to have that in our toolbox to be able to. And I'm fortunate, I'm in misdemeanor court, so the most that I can give somebody in jail is up to 6 months, but that is a long time. And I know when I have to take somebody into jail because they've not done something in the program, they're not being in compliance, or whatever, I'm not holding them in there for long periods of time. Normally it's because they were at risk to themselves or to others, or we need to kind of restart the clock and get services reset up for them. And I had to take somebody in not too long ago. I mean, I may not have seen her the next week. And so we have to be able to have that in our toolbox to be able to help these individuals. And a lot of times they will say on graduation day, it was that time you locked me up that saved my life, because I know I would not have been here the next day. So it's hard to hear that sometimes we have to take people into custody, but it is part of that toolbox. We have to have lots of different things that we can use to help motivate and to start changing how they think and how, so that's.
Once you actually get them through that, get them through treatment, you've changed they're in recovery, then what happens? Because again, there are these collateral sanctions, these prohibitions on where some people can live, where some people can work. Sometimes if where they live, they can't live because they can't be a felon and live there. Their families can't even take them in. So I want to ask all of you to weigh in on that. What needs to be done with regard to those collateral sanctions? And once again, how do you balance it with helping those people who are leaving prison, but also protecting the community?
Well, that's a very frustrating part for me right now, because I just had a graduate of the program. He called me up and said, can you write a letter about my progress in the program? I'm applying to get housing with an apartment. He's in the process of getting his cases sealed, but there is a process to apply for that. It takes several months. So I wrote this letter on letterhead, and he got denied. And if anybody knew who this person was, I cannot even tell you the changes that he's made in his life. Not only what he's done in recovery, 4.0 student, doing amazing things. And for somebody not to give him an opportunity to have a good, stable living is so frustrating to me. And so it's getting out, and I'm only one person. I go out all the time and speak to different, areas to try to say, take a chance on these people. Just give them an opportunity and see what they can do. And so it's just going to take more of us going out there and trying to change these employers to say, take a chance on these people, and landlords, and it's frustrating. That is, I would say, probably one of the more frustrating things. We've given them all these tools and they're doing great, and yet guess what? We've just slapped them with, something. So it's frustrating. I don't.
And I would say there's actually not tension between what you just said. When you help people coming out of prison, you are actually helping protect the community. The more folks have a roof over their heads, the more likely they are to be employed, the less likely they are to recidivate and commit more crime. So I think you can argue to policymakers and to community members that by helping folks re-enter society, you are helping all of society. And it's going to come down to employers being willing to take chances with hiring people coming out of incarceration. It's going to take potentially laws to prohibit discrimination in housing to keep people out with criminal records. So the government has a role, employers have a role, and nonprofits have a role. And places like Alvis House, it's actually, in many instances, not enough just to say to somebody coming out, here's a job, go work. Some folks have been in for 10, 15, 20 years and need some sort of training, some sort of help to get to a place where they can actually work effectively. So there have to be intermediaries like Alvis House to help those folks get ready for jobs that need to be created for these individuals.
Before Denise responds, I want to remind everybody that we do have audience questions that we're going to take. So please think of a question. The microphone's right over there. Please think of a question, and we'll go to you in just a minute. But Denise, I want you to
So two
weigh in.
things. I wanted
Yes.
to address the collateral sanctions piece. I agree, our clients can still not go and get a mortgage really easily. They can't get custody of their kids easily. There's things that still are a stumbling block. But I do want to address employment, because that's one of our 5 things that we do in our organization, and we do it really well. And then that is getting people employment and getting them stabilized, making sure that the jobs they get have benefits, making sure that they get a livable wage. However, we need to put more emphasis on certification programs and credentialing for our clients, because, you cannot place a client into a job that makes $10 an hour. It's just not going to work. They're going to go back and do something else, because they've got to be able to take care of their families. So it's really important to get them the training that they need. And we spend a lot of time in our organization is making sure that they are armed with the certifications and the credentials to be able to do that. And I think that's a theme throughout not only just Franklin County. We have a lot of organizations that do the same thing, but it's really imperative, because you don't want to make sure, you want to make sure that people are getting what they need. So.
And you also are training people to be entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
That if the employers aren't going to hire them, well, they've got the skills to do it themselves.
Yeah, the thing that bugs me most of all is when you are ABC organizations within Columbus that will hire our clients, but they swear me to secrecy and say, well, you better not tell anybody I hire them, because they don't want people to know that they actually hire former offenders to do the work. And every corporation you go down here, they do it, but they won't. They don't talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. And so that's part of the conversation that needs to happen. We need to have conversations about that.
So let's turn to audience questions here. Please state your name and ask your question. Please avoid editorial comments, because we've got a good line here. And remember, questions do end with question mark, so go right ahead.
My name's Tom Allen. I'm an assistant prosecutor for Franklin County. I'm not speaking on behalf of my office today, but I want to pick up on some of the comments, particularly from Judge Thomas. And I recognize, and particularly with regard to the defendant who moved for an expungement, you came and advocated on behalf of that person as from your statements. And I know on a case-by-case basis that truly does make sense. From having been in the courtroom, I've seen that happen. There are many cases where as a prosecutor, or I could see where a judge would have a role in doing that. But what we've been talking about here are systemic changes. And isn't there some concern that with the broad systemic change that the court and the government in general is abdicating its function in terms of sending a signal to the rest of the community about whether or not a person is trustworthy? I mean, if we take a blanket approach to all of this, we're taking a big risk with that. Thank you very much.
Anybody want to answer?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, we even in that letter of, that came from our court, it is basically, this is what the person has done, and this is what we can attest to. We can't control human behavior. I mean, I wish I had a magic 8-ball that says if I decide to sentence somebody this way, then this is going to happen. I mean, we do the best we can, but I think we just have to change the conversation. We just have to change the stigma that the court system is not just about incarcerating people, that we are looking at a case-by-case situation and doing those things. And then when somebody does deserve and has shown that they are changing, that giving them an opportunity to have a second chance. We're not, putting a gold stamp on saying this person's going to be perfect. I had a participant who ended up getting a job with an electrical, and they took a chance on him. I think it's just we just need to be able to provide opportunities and then let them show to those employers or to those housing places that they are changed and that they are doing it. I mean, the first thing we do in the HEART program is ask, okay, where are their job opportunities? I have a bulletin board that hangs in the courtroom that has job fair information. That doesn't just help participants in the HEART program, it helps anybody who's walking in to check in with the prosecutor. These are community things going on that are opening their doors to people that are justice involved. So those are the informations that we're trying to spread out, and then peers help peers. So we ask those questions of, are you working for an employer right now that would be willing to hire more of the participants or more people that that are justice involved? So it's just getting those conversations, and that's, the bigger picture of it all.
And I would argue that it's important for prosecutors and for governments to make or to give systemic signals, even if across the board it doesn't work 100% of the time, because there is a recognition across party lines that our criminal justice system is out of alignment. And it's one thing to say, figure it out anecdotally, and in your individual circumstances you can do better, versus we need to change the system as we know it. And there will be people who unfortunately fall through the cracks and who do harm. Our system has never been perfect. Even today, as punitive as it is, it's not perfect. But I do think it's important for people in power to give systemic signals about the direction that we want to go in, and then continue to work to perfect the new system, whatever that is.
Next question.
I'm Reverend Jack Sullivan, Jr. I direct the Ohio Council of Churches based here in Columbus. I'm curious to know, to the whole panel, how have faith communities influenced and guided your work? And how are you partnering with faith communities currently, and how might you do in the future?
Denise, I think you spoke to this a little bit earlier, too.
I did. I think that we would be remiss if we did not partner with faith-based organizations. At Alvis, I can specifically speak about is we have a lot of volunteers that come from the different faiths. Our clients come from all different faiths. I mean, we make sure and ensure that our clients are able to practice their faith. But we have volunteers that come in and present their faith to our clients. Of course, we don't force them, but the faith-based community is really involved in the programs that we have. We feel strongly about that, and I think that is something that we've done for forever, and I think we will continue to do that. I also think that on the state and national level, that there's a lot of focus put into working with faith-based organizations. We're all a part of the American Correctional Association, and we have a faith-based arm that makes sure and ensures that that access and the participation is there.
Anybody else?
I would say, as U.S. Attorney, when somebody came to speak to the office about either something good we were doing or something bad we were doing, as an individual citizen, they almost always came with a faith leader. Faith leaders amplified the voices of the community and typically represented a huge swath of the community. So I think faith leaders played an important role in having everyday people's voices heard at the highest level.
Next question.
Hi, my name is David Axelrod. I'm a partner at Shoemaker, Lupin Kendrick, but also a former federal prosecutor. It does sound as if wonderful things are happening in the state system, for which I applaud folks like Judge Thomas and like Denise. The federal courts, where I spend most of my time, are a very different system, where in my perception there's a much greater emphasis on incarceration rather than on rehabilitation. Carter, would you comment on the differences between the state and the federal system, how the federal system can be better, and what sorts of things besides the First Step Act are being done?
David, you were speaking a little fast at the end. Could you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Would you comment on how the federal system differs from the state system, how it can do better, and what sorts of things are in fact happening in the federal system besides the First Step Act, which of course is a great development?
Right. That's a tough question, and thank you. David and I were former colleagues together, so thank you for putting me on the spot.
I asked it for that reason.
So I've actually never worked in the state system, so it's hard for me to compare. My sense, and so just to give people perspective, I mentioned the statistic, 2 million people are in jails and prisons. Of those 2 million, 200,000 are in federal prisons. So federal inmate population is about 10% of the nation's population. My sense is that the folks who go to federal prison tend to stay longer, but I agree with you that the rehabilitation emphasis in federal prisons is not very strong, as far as I can tell. I can't say that people who go to federal prison do any better when they come out than folks who go to state prison. I would say across the board, there is not really an emphasis on rehabilitation. It's warehousing. Let's send them away for a while. And there's some programs that are very effective, but those programs, I think, are few and far between. So on the federal level, in terms of prison reform, I think the biggest reform I can think of is emphasis on the early release program for seniors. There's a recognition that people have been in the federal system for so long that they're turning into senior citizen homes, some parts of the federal prison, and there is the ability for early release if you're terminally ill, if you're of a certain age. And when I was with the Department of Justice, I think on average maybe 80 to 100 people were released each year through that program. It could be many times that. That, as far as I know, is the only significant reform, and it's not a lot.
One of the things I would say too about federal, because we have both federal and state and county folks in our programs. I will say that when the federal clients come to our programs, they have more stringent responsibilities than our state. For instance, if someone in our state comes from one of our state prisons and they use they can use, we can provide more treatment. They can use again, we can provide more treatment. We can use again. In the federal system, if they use one time, they're taken back. So, which is, if you look at any of the research, it's not a good way to do it, because you really need to look at the research-based programs to be able to provide that for them, but they are snatched right out of the program.
Next question.
Good afternoon. My name is John Hambrick, and I'm with the Workforce Development Board of Central Ohio. We started the conversation talking about our low unemployment rate, but then also the extensive amount of available workforce that have been previously incarcerated or that have justice exposure. So my question is, what are some of the tools in the toolbox that we can use within the panelists and then just in the community that we can share with employers? You know, what are those tools we can use to say to the employers that aren't necessarily advertising that they're hiring those that have been previously involved with the justice system? So yeah, so what are those tools that we can use to engage those employers with?
I'm going to rush you along since we can get these questions through. So what are some of the tools?
So, why is everybody pointing at me? So I will say that, you know, I spoke about the credentialing programs. I talked about the certification, but I also, one of the things that we have to do is we have to bring employers together. We do a lot of workforce development, education to employers. And also at Alvis, we actually do a lot of the interviewing for a lot of the companies. We do the interviewing, we do the drug testing, we do a lot of things that will help that that employer, but also we make sure that that person goes to work, and then they can, you ease them back into doing this on their own. But we have to be more helpful to employers to be able to make sure that our folks are employed.
Any quick follow-up? Next question.
Thank you. My name's Karen Twynham, and I work through Vineyard Columbus, which is faith-based, with a group for the last 8 years for families who have children and partners with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar disorder. We have always had at least one family that has someone in prison or trying to keep them out of prison. I'm thankful for the mental health courts, but there are still, we still have a lot of problems, including when people leave prison with a handful of medicine for a couple of weeks and everybody's best wishes. I wondered what you think needs to be done to help people who are in prison who are disabled with brain-based mental illness.
More resources and more help, and ideally assistance before prison, assistance with folks who need the mental health treatment as an alternative in the prosecutorial system, in the criminal justice system. And also, there can always be better training of law enforcement in terms of how to handle those situations, which are very difficult. Asking a police officer who has not been trained in how to address somebody with a mental illness is a tough request. So more resources earlier in the sequence of events would be.
So this comes down to funding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because we're seeing in Franklin County that if somebody is finishing out their sentence and they're interested in being on medically assisted treatment before they get out, they could, ask the services in the jail to say, I want this. And what they do is they help them not only get the medically assisted treatment, but then they link them with resources when they get out and start that. So, probably more of that needs to come in, that when there is somebody that's going to be released that has all of these mental health issues and they have all these prescribed medications, that they're immediately linked with some type of resource when they get out, so that, you hope that they follow up with that. I mean,
And they're doing that too now in the state prisons. They're doing their first injection or Suboxone of medication-assisted treatment prior to getting out, and then linking them to community programs like ours.
And even for people who have other, not necessarily addiction-related, but also.
Absolutely.
Yep. Next question.
My name is Nidhi Satyani. I'm an optometrist, but I'm also a student in the College of Public Health at OSU, so I'm looking at this from the public health perspective. You mentioned that our communities are in disrepair and that we have all these collateral sanctions, and I think all of that contributes to the health of the state as far as the public or population health approach. My question is, what do you need more of to make this more effective? And in my mind, there's kind of three categories. There's the evidence research, which will give you your 8-ball. There is the implementation research, which will help change the conversation. And there's research on human behavior, which will kind of help tailor the programs to the individuals. And maybe there are other areas as well. But what do you need more of to make all of this change happen?
Again, does it come down to funding?
It is.
Funding, but also data. I think all three categories that you just mentioned are incredibly important. To advocate for federal funding, state funding, to advocate for change, for nonprofit focus, developing the data and the success, the evidence-based programs that the judge mentioned earlier in any of those areas, I think goes a long way towards pushing change. But a lot of folks will say the problem's bad, and when as a funder we say, well, can you show us how bad? Can you document and then be able to show us the metrics that you're going to prove the impact of your work? That can be, that if they don't have it, it's hard for us to say we're going to fund you.
That's one of the things we say all the time is data, 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 because if you're not basing your programs on the data, you're not going to have the expected outcome. And so it's really, really important to do the evidence-based programs. 25 years ago, we didn't do that. And then we realized, oh my gosh, why would someone give you dollars and expect you to do things and you don't have the right outcome? So you have to do things based on the evidence.
I know as a judge, any resource or anything that we refer to our participants, I go and I visit. If there's a new treatment facility that calls me up and says, we want to work, we want to partner with the courts, well, I'm going to come out and I'm going to ask those questions. What kind of treatment are you doing? Is it evidence-based? Are you all these things. So we have to make sure that any of these resources that come in, that we're holding them accountable as well to make sure they're doing their part and the issues that are going on, so.
So we have time for 2 more questions and 2 fairly quick answers to them. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Samantha Bach, and I'm from Nationwide Children's Hospital, and I'm a researcher there. And so Ohio is currently ranked 4th in the nation for the number of children exposed to parental incarceration. And this experience disproportionately affects children of color and children in poverty. And I was wondering if the courts are keeping a data repository or anything to reach out to families upon arrest to screen for social needs or to track children in our community so we can provide these resources to stop the intergenerational cycle of imprisonment and help these families.
Well, I mean, I think at least in my court, you know, if I'm working with somebody that's been arrested, I think when they're being referred to one of our specialized dockets, you know, we do get those questions about family and children, and we try to reach out, you know, as much as we can, you know, if Children's Services is involved. We absolutely, any participant that has children or is trying to get their children back in our program, they get we link with a parent mentor. So we have somebody that's helping them because what we have seen too is when a participant gets their children back, there's all kinds of new things that happen, the overwhelmingness of having their kids back, and 1, they're trying to be in recovery, and 2, they're trying to take care of their kids, and that's when we start to see the relapses and things happen because it's just too much. And so we need to have these systems set up with parent mentors and Children's Services, and, you know, to kind of come together. I think we can do a better job of the outreach with families, but we're hiring more social workers, which is great. I'm a licensed social worker to see, you know, so getting that field in the court system is so impactful to be able to have that resource there to reach out to families. So,
last question. Go ahead.
My name is Wendy Tarr. I'm affiliated with a nonprofit, faith-based, with St. Vincent de Paul in the Catholic Diocese. My question has to do with, you know, you all have been discussing a lot about the court system pre-sentence and a reentry on the back end. My question to you all is, you know, folks that are incarcerated, we have a new administration leading ODRC. What kind of changes would you like to see happening inside during the time of incarceration that you would hope for that would benefit all the other things that you're talking about?
Good way to wrap this up.
So my opinion is I think we've got a good administration. We were really pleased with the appointments that Governor DeWine made, but also with Annette Chambers-Smith, the Director of the Department of Rehab and Corrections. There is a focus on reentry begins at entry. That when someone enters the institution, that's when it starts and that's when it should begin. There's also an emphasis on taking a look at special populations. We had a long conversation about persons with developmental disabilities, persons with mental health. How do we get those folks out? And then how do we program them while they're in the institution? And that's the conversation that's taking place. And then take a look at the Ohio Recovery Alliance. That is something that is going to be amazing too, and is going to be able to reach in and take care of folks too.
I would say the ability to pursue education, whether GED, college, or higher, job training, mental health counseling, and efforts to keep that person connected to their families.
good. No, that's
All right, I'm going to hand it back to Carol.
I hope you found today's forum informative and also have a better understanding of the need for services and support necessary to help individuals move back into our community, including, of course, training and jobs. Let's thank our speakers, Denise Robinson, Carter Stewart, Jodi Thomas, and of course, Karen Kasler. Thank you. And thank you all for being here, and see you next Wednesday.